So now we're going to identify the independent and dependent variables. So in the previous activity, in the previous lessons, you became familiar with bivariate data. Bivariate data involves two variables. One of these variables is the dependent variable and the other one is the independent variable. So what is the difference between the two variables? We're going to find out that. So the first one is the dependent variable depends on the other variables or factors. So from the word dependent, so it depends on the other. It is something that is influenced and affected. It is also associated with the words effect or outcome. It usually follows the word on. So effects of blank on blank. So it's on the on is the dependent, while on the other hand, the dependent variable affects the dependent variable. It is something you have control over, one which you can choose or manipulate. However, in some cases, you may not be able to manipulate the independent variable. It is commonly known as the cause or the reason behind changes. So it's the cause and the reason of the changes. The dependent depends on the independent variable. It's usually followed by the word of. So effects of blank. So that's the independent variable on blank, which is the dependent variable. For example, the researchers wants to determine the effects of use of social media and academic performance of students in mathematics. The bivariate data in the study are use of social media and the academic performance. So the two variables are the use of social media and the academic performance. So those are the two variables. The academic performance depends on the social media, on the use of social media, because the use of social media affect the academic performance. So therefore, the independent variable is the use of social media and the academic performance is the dependent variable because the academic performance nagadepende sa use of social media. Or one of the clues are yung off. After ng off is the independent variable in the, so that's the dependent variable. So in illustration, the independent variable is the use of social media. The dependent variable is the academic performance. So it's the use of social media affects the academic performance, or the academic performance depends on the use of social media. So that is the introduction. So we're going to have activity. So on the table below, you have set of variables not categorized into dependent and independent variables. So we're not going to answer in here. So you may answer, but we're just going to identify which is the independent and which is the dependent. So for example number 1, the chance of developing cancer, the number of cigarettes a person smokes. So what do you think is the dependent? Saan yung nagadepende? It's the, this is the dependent variable and this is the independent variable. Why is this the independent variable? Because this number of cigarettes a person smokes affects the chance of developing cancer. Or yung chance of developing cancer nagadepende sa number of cigarettes a person smokes. So if you're going to answer in here, so the dependent variable is the chance of developing cancer depends on the number of cigarettes a person smokes. So this is the independent and this is the dependent variable. Next one is taking care of our natural resources and global warming. So the taking care of our natural resources and global warming. So saan dyan ang nagadepende? So what is depending is the global warming. The global warming depends on our taking care of our natural resources. So this would be the dependent and this would be the independent, because if we are not taking care of our natural resources, there would be the global warming would be worsened. So next, chance of dropping out, tardiness, cutting classes, and absenteeism of our students. Saan ang nagadepende sa dalawa? Saan ang independent? Saan ang dependent? So it's this one is the dependent and this one is the independent. So ang chance of dropping out nagadepende sa tardiness, cutting classes, at saka absenteeism of a student. Kung marami kang absent, marami kang late, marami kang cutting classes, so the higher the chance na mag-drop out ka. So next, educational attainment and opportunities for high-paying jobs. So which is depending? So ang nagadepend is yung opportunities for high-paying job. And educational attainment is the independent. Kasi ang opportunities, yung for, kung gusto mo ng high-paying job, nagadepende siya sa educational attainment mo. Lalong-lalo na dito sa Pilipinas. Next, the total calories and fat. Number of junk foods you eat. So, the dependent is the total calories because ang total calories and fat nagadepende sa number of junk foods you eat. So that's for activity number 1. Let's proceed with activity number 1.3 and 1.4. So we're just going to identify the independent and the dependent. So number 1, effects of temperature on plant pigmentation. So underline the independent and circle the dependent. So effects of temperature. So this is the independent and this is the dependent. So usually after on, yun siya ang dependent. So effects of fertilizer brand on plant growth. So this is the dependent and dependent. Effects of brightness and dependent on a moth being attracted to the light. So what's dependent is the attraction to the light. So it depends on the brightness. So test score of students and time spent on studying. So saan dyan ang dependent? So ang test score ba nagadepende sa time spent or ang time spent nagadepende sa test score? So it's the other way around. So ang time spent is the independent and the test score is the dependent. Next, relationship between income and educational attainment of young adults. So, and income, educational attainment. So, this is the independent and this is the dependent. Usually, if you're going to write this, mauna talaga yung independent. Ito lang, it's for confusion purposes, probably. So, next, at activity 1.4, identify the independent and dependent variables in each question stated below. How does logical thinking develop critical thinking? So, the two variables are logical thinking as a critical thinking. So the independent is the logical thinking. So logical thinking, ang critical thinking nakadepende daw sa logical thinking. So the critical thinking depends on the logical thinking. So next, what are the effects of Korean novellas on the Filipino value system? So Korean novellas, kasi after ng off, so it's independent on the Filipino value system is the dependent variables. So next, in what way does collaborative learning increase communicative competence? So the two variables are collaborative learning tapos communicative competence. So saan dyan ang nagadepende? So ang collaborative learning affects the communicative competence. So collaborative learning affects the communicative competence. Next, number 4, to what extent does texting decrease students' grammatical competence? So the two variables are texting tapos students' grammatical competence. So to texting daw decrease student grammatical competence. So texting decrease student grammatical competence. So ang students' grammatical competence nagadepende sa texting, or it is affected by texting. So what corrupt practices trigger one's resignation? So the two variables are corrupt practices at saka resignation. So saan dyan ang naapektuhan? It's the resignation. Naapektuhan ang resignation by corrupt practices. So the independent variable is the corrupt practices while the dependent variable is the resignation. So in graphing the scatter plot, independent variables always goes on the x-axis. So this is the independent variable. So for drawing, this is the independent variable. Tapos, the y-axis is for the dependent variable. The vertical axis and the horizontal axis. For the last one, so we're going to still to identify the dependent and independent. For number 1, for example, math minute and peer tutoring and raising the level of students' mastery in solving basic operations of integers. So what is the dependent variable? It's that there are 3 variables actually: the math minute and peer tutoring. However, this is considered one. Because in raising the level of students' mastery in solving basic operation of integers. So, itong math minute and peer tutoring affects the level of students' mastery ko. So, ang math minute and peer tutoring affects the students' mastery. So, that's the dependent variable. Let's proceed with number 1. Organizational commitment and teaching performance of elementary teachers in Rizal. So the 2 variables are organizational commitment at saka teaching performance. So saan dyan ang naapektuhan ng isa? So si teaching performance naapektuhan ng organizational commitments. So organizational commitments affects the teaching performance, or the teaching performance depends on the organizational commitment. So it needs also logical and critical thinking. Next, conceptual and interpersonal and technical skills of bank managers, their relationship to operational efficacy. So the 2 variables are, so the conceptual and interpersonal technical skills and operational efficacy. So those are the 2 variables. So their relationship to, so operational efficacy is the dependent variable, while the conceptual, interpersonal, and technical skills is the independent variables, because this one affects the operational efficacy. Next, increasing mathematics achievements through conceptualized and localized materials. So the 2 variables are mathematics achievement, and then the other one is localized, contextual and localized materials. So saan dyan ang naapektuhan? Si mathematics achievement naapektuhan ni contextualized and localized materials. So come. Next, number 4, effect of blended learning. So because it's off, so we know that it's the independent on student achievement. So that's the dependent. So it's easy if there is off and on, 2 like that. So next, effectiveness, exposing students to classical music. So exposing students to classical music, that's the exposure to classical music to the reading comprehension. So the reading comprehension is the dependent variable because it's after off, on pala. After off is exposing students to classical music. So exposure of the students to classical music is the independent variable. So that's how you're going to identify the dependent and independent variable.